So, to quickly go through the heart then, right? First thing that we need to be aware of are a few different structures that we find in the heart. Right, the heart is basically, we call it a bipump, right? It's a double pump. It can be split into two halves. That middle part there, I've not got a label for it, but the middle part is called the septum. On each side then, you've got an atrium and a ventricle. The atrium and the ventricles are separated by valves. A valve is there to stop, it's there to ensure that the blood flows in only one direction. It stops something called backflow. So for instance, if this is our valve, as the blood's going in that direction, so if we increase the pressure in this area here, the valve would open and the blood would move through. If then we increase the pressure in this area here, then that pressure is going to force that valve shut so the blood can't go back in the opposite direction. So valves are there to ensure that blood is only flowing in one direction. So a few of the key features of the heart. The big blood vessel that's entering the heart is called the vena cava. Like we've said, you've got atriums. Atriums are the top chambers. Two ventricles. Ventricles are the bottom chambers. Going out towards the lungs, you've got the pulmonary artery. Right, the pulmonary artery is the only artery in your body that will carry deoxygenated blood. Your blood goes up around your lungs and it enters back to the other side of the heart through the pulmonary vein. The pulmonary vein is the only vein in your body that carries oxygenated blood. From that, it moves through the heart and up through the aorta, and from the aorta, about half of it goes to your brain, probably a little less than half, but a fair amount of it goes to your brain. About 40% of all of the calories your body burns is to keep your brain going, and the rest of it goes around your body to be used in respiration. So if we go and look at the physical process of how it's moving through the heart then. So the first thing that happens is that the blood from the body, so deoxygenated blood from the body, enters through the vena cava. Right, and it enters the right-hand atrium. Next thing that happens is that that atrium contracts. As the atrium contracts, that increases the pressure. So it's important to remember that you're noting down that increases pressure. Right? Which forces the blood through a valve into a ventricle. So the blood's being forced from the atrium where it's entered. Because we've increased the pressure, it's forced that valve open and it's gone into a ventricle. Next thing that happens, the ventricle, right, when it's pumping through, we say that the ventricle and the atriums contract. So the ventricle contracts, same as before, which increases pressure. Two things happen. That increase in pressure in the ventricle closes the valve between the atrium and the ventricle. So the Right, it's actually, we call it an atrioventricular valve, or an AV valve. It's because you're going from an atrium to a ventricle, and it's a valve. So your atrioventricular valve closes, and the blood is pumped to the lungs through the pulmonary artery. Right, so it's going up through, right, technically there's another valve between that ventricle and the pulmonary artery to help stop backflow. But, so the blood is now being pumped up through that pulmonary artery up to the lungs. Right, remember, blood picks up oxygen and loses CO2 at the lungs. The blood then re-enters the heart back on the opposite side. So the blood re-enters through the pulmonary vein. So remember, it's the only vein that's carrying oxygenated blood. Right? And it enters into an atrium. That atrium contracts, forces it into the ventricle. It's forcing it through another valve. And finally, that ventricle contracts. Forcing the blood through the aorta to the body to be used in respiration and such forth. And that is a very, very brief overview of how blood is moving through the heart.